right, and I'll hand it over to Bill.
All right. Good morning. Looks like Kristin has joined us, and we've got a pretty good crowd today. And let me introduce Kristin Durfee. She is an accomplished author. One of her books is called Mass, and that's through Orange Blossom Publishing, which I think is owned by Ariel Hoy, right? And Ariel has been one of our past speakers here as well. Kristin has also written the Four Corners trilogy, and she's got several short stories and such, thrillers, speculative, and other anthologies that she's been a part of. And she has the 2021 Young Adult Book of the Year from the Florida Writers Association. Is that Mass? Is that the same story or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I know Kristin is also a proponent of the National Novel Writing Month. You're a big proponent of that. If you'd like to talk about that a little bit, that's fine. But today's program is dedicated to how to get the most from your critique partners, which is something that's of keen interest to me, and I hope it interests everybody here today. So, Kristin, welcome to the Suncoast Writers Guild, and thank you for coming on. Kristin stepped in and when we had to change our schedule and due to the hurricane, and I very much appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
I appreciate you all for having me. Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. So I write a little bit of everything. So my first book was published in 2015. So I definitely have learned a lot along the way. I am in the process of writing my 8th novel right now. It's my book that I'm working on for National Novel Writing Month. So I don't know if anybody else is participating in that. If you are, you all look wonderfully not stressed. So I'm very impressed since it's day 4 and I think we're supposed to be at 8,000 words or something by now. So
is it too late to start? Is it too late to start?
It is not too late to start. You will just have to write faster. So those of you who are not familiar with National Novel Writing Month, the website is NaNoWriMo. So NaNoWriMo. So nationalnovelwritingmonth.org. And it's a really great community. So November's goal is to write 50,000 words. So that is an average of 1,667 words a day. And so the goal is, to kind of get as close to that first draft as you can. But Nano's great. It's a wonderful website. They run summer camps in the summer where you can set your own goals. You get put in virtual cabins. So it's all online, but it's a really fun kind of motivator to work on projects. So I have written 4 nano books. So my second in my trilogy, my third in my trilogy, Mass, those were all books that I wrote on Nano. I have a book that's coming out probably late next year with Wild Rose Press. That's a historical fiction. That was also a Nano book. And I am in the process of editing 2 other ones and writing another one for this year. So I like to stay as busy as possible. So my talk today, I'm really going to go through kind of what expectations should be, the differences between critique partners and beta readers, how they can really help support you on your process. So it's going to be quite a bit of information, but I'm going to try to break it down as systematically as possible. The presentation itself will be about 45 minutes, so you all will have plenty of time to ask questions. Feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom just to kind of jot your questions down, but I will plan on answering them at the end. I hope I've set this up where I do answer, some of the bigger questions there. So there might be a slide that you might get a question for, but chances are it's going to be answered on the next slide. If there is a time where I get, through a slide a little bit too quickly, or I am someone that can talk fast sometimes. So feel free to turn off your microphone and hop in and ask me to repeat something. But otherwise, if we can, let's leave the questions till the end. And then that way, hopefully we can get a nice kind of group discussion. Or if any of you, are experiencing, any struggles in that process. Okay. So I feel like every single time I do this, it's like the first time I've done it. Okay. So hopefully you all see that. Nods. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Okay. And then with this presentation, sorry, like I said, it's a little hard for me to keep track of the chats at the same time. So if somebody does see something that pops up on the chat that looks like it needs to be addressed right away, feel free to just kind of either virtually raise your hand or hop in real quick, and I'll try to address that. Okay, so tips and tricks for working with beta readers. So again, I am the author of the Four Corners trilogy and Mass, which are both young adult books, and also the short story Touch, which is also young adult. I'm a member of the Florida Writers Association and the Women Fiction Writers Association, and I live in right outside of Orlando with my husband, my son, and my 2 quirky dogs. So one of them is currently sleeping on the bed behind me. So hopefully there will not be any barking or screaming of children, and we will all get through this presentation together with everyone being quiet for an hour. I have a 5-year-old, so that might be give or take, but let's all keep our fingers crossed that we get through this. Okay, so we're going to touch on kind of the 4 main groups of eyes that might be looking on your project when you're complete with it. So we have our critique partners. So, and again, I'm going to go a little further into each of these and ways to find them and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so our critique partners. So they can be used to kind of bounce ideas off of. So they're not necessarily reading your work or all of your work. So they might be somebody, and it doesn't even have to be super official. It might be a writer friend that you go out for coffee for and say, okay, so I'm percolating this what if idea, what if this happens, but I'm sort of hitting a snag on who my bad guy might be, or what could possibly make this situation worse. So it's kind of like that brainstorming person. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fellow writer. It can be somebody who, let's say that you are writing a thriller for the first time, and you have a good friend who all they read is thrillers. It can be someone who's just very well versed in that particular genre that can kind of help give you tips and tricks, and kind of push you in certain directions, especially if you're at a point in a story where, you're merging, or you're saying, okay, does my character go left or right? They can kind of help bounce ideas off of, well, what would going right look like? And what would going left look like? And again, so they're not necessarily reading anything that you've written, but they can still be helpful in the process. An alpha reader. So these are readers that will typically read as you write, or they may read a very early or unedited drafts or chapters. So sometimes you might see on different social medias, where someone might post, hey, I've just written this first chapter. I'm not really sure if it's working. Can someone please just read this for me? So that person might not have finished that whole book. And again, that could also be like a crossroads decision where you're not really sure, okay, I've got my character in this situation that now I have to make a big decision. Can I have somebody read up to this point, and then can we, kind of work together on what you think, that might be. A beta reader. So they are somebody, and that's usually a term that you're probably going to hear most often when we talk about doing exchanges for reading drafts. So your beta reader is going to read a completed and at least semi-clean draft. So you're going to, let's say you finish your first draft, you participated in NaNoWriMo and you won and you have this draft going, fantastic. Typically you are not then going to immediately hand it to somebody. There's probably going to be typos in there. You might have an instance where you misspelled a character's name or forgot it, which I have totally done that before. You know, so you're going to want to go through, read through your whole draft again, possibly make some notes, do some self-editing and all that. But I think the beta reader is really a strong tool to use kind of once you've gotten your story about as far as you can take it. And then editors. So your editors are your paid individuals. So while there are websites where you can pay for critique partners, alpha readers, and beta readers, a lot of times those are not paid positions necessarily, where your editors are going to be. And so they're going to look at specific areas of your manuscript. So they might focus on grammar, on structure, on plot, character development. So usually they have a separate subspecialty. Okay, so let's go through some of the pluses and minuses for each of these avenues of somebody looking at your work. So our critique partner. So again, our critique partner is somebody that may or may not actually be reading any pages, but they're someone that usually is brought in either pretty early on in the process or if you hit a snag in the process. So some of our pros is that it's great to have somebody to discuss an idea with. My first couple of stories that I wrote, you know, I was a newer writer. I wasn't necessarily shouting from the rooftops that I was, you know, working on these projects. And so I didn't do a lot of talking with other people and talking through them. And on my last 2 projects, I've actually started the process with talking through the idea with someone else. And it's really been an interesting kind of workshopping of the story. You can potentially fix problems before they start. So let's say that you have this really great idea, you know, where you're going to have Pegasus that live in the ocean. And that's what your story is going to be about. Your critique partner might come up and say, okay, well, so a Pegasus is a horse. They typically don't have gills. So are they going to be more like dolphins where they have to come up for air? Or are you going to make them some kind of mermaid type thing? And it might be a question that you hadn't even thought about, you know, the answer of how are they breathing, you know, so that kind of stuff. And that might actually change a direction that your story goes. And they can also give you a lot of confidence in a project. There's something about telling somebody a new idea and seeing their face light up and go, oh my gosh, I've never read anything like that before. I can't wait to see it. Like, please let me see it, you know, when you have it done, and kind of giving you that motivation that it's a story that is worthy. So of course, with everything, you know, there are definitely drawbacks as well. It can be kind of self-conscious to share a new idea with somebody, especially if you haven't done that before and you're not sure if this person is really a trusted critique partner, because you can risk someone not liking it. And that can be really demoralizing right at the beginning, you know, finding that person to trust that you're going to say, okay, here's this idea I've been percolating over. And if they go, ugh, I've read like 12 books that have Pegasus in the ocean, like I'm so tired of this genre, which you might not have even been aware of, you know, it can kind of make you quit before you even get started. So that's something where I think in those cases, it is really good, you know, if you can find somebody that you trust in one of your writing groups, possibly even somebody that you worked with as a reader on a previous project. So they might be familiar with your writing style, your abilities, you know, all that kind of stuff, or they might already be predisposed to being excited to read something else by you, or somebody that maybe writes in that same genre. where you can kind of talk through those ideas. So again, figuring out that person to trust, can take a little bit out of you, and if somebody does end up not liking that idea, then you have a decision to make. Do you write it anyway? Do you find a new critique partner? Do you try to think of new ways to kind of make it fresh and all that? So there is a little bit of self-risk, for that, for your own confidence. Okay, so alpha readers. So again, our alpha readers are who we are going to tap when we are still in that writing process. So they might be, again, reading things that aren't necessarily totally edited and all of that, but they're well aware of that. They're not concerned if they see a couple typos or things like that. So they can help you work through some big ideas or sections you're not sure that are working in your story. Again, you kind of get to those crossroad moments sometimes, or if you've run out of steam a little bit on a project and, you're wondering, oh, is this even working? Sometimes having somebody come in and read a little bit of it can help get you energized and excited about the project again. It can also kind of be an accountability. So if they've said, oh, hey, every 2 weeks, I'm open for reading a chapter, that kind of will motivate you, to keep, writing those chapters for them. And they can also help point out fixes before they become very major. Again, the example of, the underwater world, they might read something and you have decided to build this entire community, on this idea. And they might say, oh, I just think that this might be a little problematic because if this is where you think your story is going, like it might be difficult to do it there. So that can be kind of nice, before you go down a road that would create a lot of editing on the back end. You can kind of work that out at the beginning. Again, though, it can be really stressful, especially when you're sharing unedited work. So it maybe might shake your confidence a little bit. Again, you really have to make sure that, as much as you can, the people that you're picking are going to be as, give as much constructive criticism as possible. And again, if you're sharing pieces as they become available, scheduling can kind of be an issue since it is such a big commitment on both parties. So if your alpha reader says, hey, I can take something every single week, and let's say 1 week you get sick, so you're not able to give anything, and then 2 weeks later you finally give pages, but then they're on vacation, some of that scheduling can kind of get off sometimes. And if you are planning to wait until they give feedback on a chapter to keep going, sometimes that can kind of slow the process down a little bit. All right, so your beta readers. So you have finished your draft, you've read it, you've done your editing as much as you can, and now you're at the point where you just need some fresh eyes on it. So they can give insights on possibly issues that you can't see anymore. Chances are, you've read this book a bunch of times. You're probably going to read it a bunch more times. You might miss, a misspelled there versus there, or things like that, where, especially after reading something quite a few times, your brain is just filling in what it knows is supposed to be there. I also find that it works really well for my character motivations. So I tend to write really lean first drafts. So I am good at getting my characters from point A to point B. I can get them on their journey. They can accomplish things that they want to do. They slay the dragon, all of that. But I tend to forget that they then have feelings about that. So a lot of times I know that I need to work on the emotional journey of my characters. So I can get them from one place to another, but sometimes I forget in certain scenes, their motivators. So that's where, for me, the beta readers can sometimes be really helpful, because they might question, well, why is this person doing this? Like, wouldn't they just do X, Y, and Z? And, we all know these characters so well. They've been living in our heads for some months, sometimes years, depending on how long we've been working on a story. So I might instantly say, oh my gosh, they would never do that. It's totally out of their character. But the beta readers don't see that. So that lets me know that I have a little bit of a deficiency on the motivators of my characters. So that's a good thing, to know too. Or on the flip side, if you're somebody who writes much more of those character emotional driven stories, your beta readers might say like, okay, yeah, they're feeling a lot of emotion, but like they're not accomplishing anything, to really kind of move you along in that story. And again, they can give those objective thoughts. Every single time I hand my book over to a beta reader, I think it's as good as I can possibly get it. And every single time they hand it back to me with lots of notes that totally make it better that I never even saw. And they can also, and this is a really important thing too, especially, as you learn more about your own writing style, they can point out trends in your writing. So everybody has their overused phrases. Some of my favorite are just and almost and so. And usually, I'll have a project where I finally get myself down to where I only use 50 justs, where I came from 500. And then in my next book, I replace just with or something like that, so, and you kind of don't even realize, I think sometimes, when you're conscientious of your crutch words, so you stop using them and then you create a new one. So it's really good for readers for that. And then also similar sounding names. So let's say everyone in your story's first letter of their name begins with the letter N. They might sound a little bit different to you in your head. That they're different people, but that might actually end up being confusing to a reader if the names sound really similar. So that's also pretty helpful, if somebody is having trouble keeping track of who everybody is. Some of the cons for beta readers, because typically they are agreeing to reading the entire manuscript, sometimes it can be difficult to have those readers follow through. It's a really big commitment, of somebody saying, yes, I'm going to read 90,000 words of your story, but critically. So I'm going to be making notes through it and stopping and all that kind of stuff. It is a time-consuming process. And sometimes also, if it's somebody who either hasn't been a beta reader before or is somebody that leans to much more criticism, sometimes it can be too critical to be helpful. And then the flip side of that also, can kind of be an issue. Where I've had times where I've given, done, let's say 3 chapters that I'll exchange with somebody to see if we're a good fit. They'll read those 3 chapters and maybe make 2 notes on it. One is a misspelling and one somebody saying, oh, I don't know what's happening here. Where for me, if I'm reading the story, I'm usually making a note on every page, or at the very least at the end of every chapter, to get that feedback. And it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. When I do beta reading for other people, I will also say, yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the internal dialogue that I'm looking to connect to this character, so that there's something actionable. So both being too critical of this doesn't work, this is boring, I keep skipping over all that stuff, it doesn't really give you anything to try to improve on. And again, on the other side, if they say, oh, this is great, like, I know it's not, it's a first draft, like, I know it's going to be terrible. I've made peace with that. Like, I need help making it better. And it can also be really difficult to hear some of the feedback and hurt your confidence. So it really can be, you've poured your heart and soul into a story, you think it's really good, and then you have somebody that's picking things apart. It might even be a particular character. In my first series that I wrote, I had one character who was my favorite. And I had this other character who I liked, but more of my readers gravitated toward that other character than the one that I loved. And, that was a little, like, it made me feel like I wanted to defend them. Like, no, this person's great and all, but this is the person that everybody, is supposed to love. And so I would suggest, when you do get those notes back and stuff, usually what I do is I read through them all and then I put it away for a couple of days, because it can be difficult to read some of that and to like think in that moment of high emotion of how to turn some of that criticism actionable. And then your editor. So again, these are our paid professionals that are going to be looking at your story. So they will definitely give a more professional eye on your work. They can give good insight on industry trends and norms, as language changes, those types of things, like they can kind of be helpful with that. Sensitivity readers can come into this also, if you're writing something that's outside of your own experience. Sometimes a sensitivity reader can be helpful for that. And they can sometimes give more meaningful or helpful feedback. So again, that more actionable feedback. The cons are, they are going to cost money. Some agents are also editors. And so usually hiring them for an editing process means you cannot pitch that story to them in the future. Some may, but usually for, their own ethics, that they usually will not take on a project that they have accepted money for editing. So just to keep in mind, if you have somebody who this is your dream agent and they also do editing and you think, oh my gosh, I'll get this story in front of them, they'll read it, and then they'll love it so much, they'll want to take it and sell it, that might actually not be the case. So, I'm sorry. And then also sometimes hiring the wrong type of editor. So let's say that you want a more developmental editor, to really kind of help hone your story along and all of that. And that's not really what their level of expertise is, where they are much more adept at more the grammatical and line editing, or also getting one too early in the process. So, you've done through, your self edits. Let's say that you didn't do a beta reader and you immediately, go to find an editor. It can be really costly when some of the stuff that they're going to be finding are things that an early reader probably would have found, your grammatical errors, your typing errors, all of that kind of stuff. And again, a good editor should also let you know this. So if you hire somebody, usually they will do like a first chapter or first 10 pages sample. And there's a lot you can find in that amount. Where they can already see some trends in there. And so if they see that you're not quite ready yet, they'll usually tell you, which a good editor should. So they might say, hey, I think you need to get some beta readers to read this first. You could pay me, a couple $1,000s to do this, but you're still going to have to go through more self-editing. So it would be a better use of your money to kind of hold off a little bit later in the process. Okay, so finding beta readers. And this is always something that, can be a little bit of a struggle, especially at the beginning. Once you've written maybe a couple of short stories or poems, novellas, novels, you might have a group where, especially in this writer's group where, you might have a couple of people that write similar genres that you can do exchanges with. So your local writers groups are great, great for looking at that. Professional organizations. So if you're a member of, let's say, the Women's Fiction Writing Association, the Florida Writers Association, those types of ones sometimes will have resources for pairing beta readers. For those of you on Facebook, there are Facebook groups that are dedicated to beta readers and critique partners. I personally would suggest on those because I have used them and they have been really good resources. When you make your post for them, make them as detailed as possible. So you're going to want to have your little kind of back cover blurb or your little elevator pitch. You'll want to say how many words it is, what genre it is, possibly what medium you're working with. So let's say that you're working in Google Docs or you're working in Word, you might want to put that in there if you want your reader using the same thing. Personally, I like to do all my drafting in Word and do all my editing using track changes. And so that's what I want my beta reader to do. So if I have somebody that's only working in Google Docs, they're just not going to be a good fit for me. Whether or not they're a really good, reader, they would give good feedback. It's just, since that's not a process that I'm usually doing, I want to be as streamlined as possible. And also in these groups, you do have all levels of writers and readers, which again is great. So it means that you don't have to, have published 15 books, to be able to go in these groups and ask for help. But just also know that sometimes that can be a limiting factor. So you might also have people, who are newer to the writing process that are looking for readers. So I have definitely learned when I am doing first time, what I would call a beta swap. So you're each agreeing to read each other's words. That definitely adds a level of accountability. So that person is more likely to read your stuff because you are reading their stuff, so they want that motivator. But I've learned that I will usually agree to the first 3 chapters or 50 pages, whichever is less. Some people do write really big chapters, so that's also good to know. And so that way, you can both see what the writing style is. You both might write fantasy, but they might write very high concept fantasy. That's not quite, your cup of tea. And again, you're probably going to be reading this story for about 4 to 6 weeks. That's usually about the turnaround time I ask for my beta readers. And then I also give people for about a 90,000 word document. So you want to make sure, does it look like it's going to hold your interest? Is their writing style, does it look like they have edited this book themselves a few times? If you're finding lots and lots of typos, lots and lots of structure issues, chances are that is going to be a trend that's going to go through their entire manuscript. And so that might be something that is just going to be a little too time consuming and something that they should be able to fix just on the actionable feedback that you give for those first 3 chapters. And on the flip side, you might send your chapters to them and they don't really give you feedback that you find helpful for what you're kind of looking for. Again, maybe too much feedback, maybe too little feedback. It might just not be a good fit. And so I have learned that that's much better to figure out in a smaller dose than agreeing to read an entire manuscript and realizing weeks into the process that you're probably not a great fit, for each other. And then also for those of you who are on Twitter, you can also look for hashtags for that also. So hashtag beta reader, you can search through that hashtag and see if there are people, of your similar genre, who are also looking for readers. All right, so you found your readers, congratulations. Now what do we do? Okay, so you definitely want, again, to decide what you're looking for. So do you need that entire manuscript? Do you need just the beginning of it? I usually like to have 2 rounds of beta readers. So I try to do 2 readers for my first round and 2 readers for my second round. So 4 people in total. And then once I have done that second round, if I've made any really big structural changes. So my story that's coming out next year, it is about a female homicide detective in 1930 New York City, who was trying to find and stop a serial killer. And so when I had originally written that story, her character was male. And so on my second round of beta edits, one of my readers and critique partners, when I was talking with them, they said it's a very interesting story, but they didn't feel like there was anything really fresh about it. There had been lots of books written around that time, of male detectives. And so I had done some research and I found that there were female detectives at that time. There weren't very many of them, but some agencies were starting to hire them. And so when I was talking it through with her, we were like, oh gosh, it would add a really interesting extra element if not only is she in this race against time to find this person, but she's also up against the bureaucracy and sexism of her age, in this department. So because I had done such a major rewrite on that, I then went back to find an additional beta reader. And then sometimes what I will do, if I'm at the process where, okay, everything's good, I have my query package together, I have my blurb, I have my synopsis, most agents will ask for anywhere between the first one chapter to the first 50 pages. 50 pages is kind of the most I've seen that they'll ask for. So I will sometimes send out to this writers group that I'm in and say, hey, is anybody available to read, the first 10 pages, the first 20 pages of this, just to make sure I don't have any typos. I might also hire an editor just for that portion also, just to make sure it's really as good as I can possibly get it. Because if that's all that those agents are looking for, I'm really wanting to hook them as much as possible. And then that way too, especially if, you are, trying to use your funds as wisely as possible and all of that, I found that it's not nearly as expensive to hire, an editor for just those first couple of chapters. And you really do get a lot of bang for your buck for that. When you are sending out for the beta readers, you also can figure out whether or not if you want to give specific questions to them. So they can be helpful if you have particular things that you're looking for, in the back of your mind, you're wondering, oh gosh, all right, is this character, like I want them to still be someone that you root for, but they're not really likable. But that's kind of the point, because their journey into becoming the better person is what carries through this story. But it's kind of that fine line, of is someone just way too much of a jerk that you almost don't even want them to get better and succeed, so that might be something that you ask a reader of, hey, I'm a little concerned that I've not made this character likable. That's something that I want you to keep in mind as you're reading. It can also help give structure to new or new to you readers. Again, for things that you're kind of looking for. If somebody is a new beta reader, they also might be a little self-conscious, of wanting to make sure that they give good feedback, of not being too negative, and all of that. So it can take some of the pressure off if you just give them a couple of questions to answer. Was there a point in time where you lost interest? Did you find after chapter 3, again, which is what a lot of agents, will request at the beginning, did you find at that point that you wanted to keep reading? Did you find that the story started in the right place? Is there a lot of buildup that happens in the beginning, but your action doesn't happen until later? That might be something you have to rework. And then also be really frank about your time frame. I always give I would like feedback back by this date, even if I'm not really pressured for that. I'll say, here's the number of the pages, here's the number of words. I would like feedback in 4 to 6 weeks. And that just lets somebody know, okay, there is some kind of time frame. Because I don't know how all of you are, but I'm somebody that tends to work a little bit better on deadline. And if somebody says, just get it to me when you get it to me, it's hard for me to like keep that in the forefront of my brain to remember to do it. And so that sometimes I think helps them be more accountable for it. So some worries and concerns that definitely crop up, for finding your beta readers is ghosting. So you've agreed that you're going to, exchange work, you're going to hear back in 4 to 6 weeks, and you do not hear back from them in that amount of time. I will usually send a touching base email. Since I pretty much always do incentivized swaps for all of my beta readers, I will do the same 4 to 6 weeks. Usually at the 3-week mark, I'll send them an email and say, hey, I'm about 75% of the way through my story. I'm on target to get this back to you in the next week or two. I'm really enjoying it so far. Let me know if this time frame still works for you. So that lets them know I'm accountable, I'm doing what I said I was, and also motivates them, to kind of be in that same place. I hear this a lot when people get worried about somebody else stealing their idea. So they're worried about sending out to a beta reader. They're worried that maybe they need to get it copyrighted beforehand and all of that they're worried that they'll send it out and then they'll find it published on some website. So chances are you have a bunch of copies saved. If you really are worried about it, you can always email yourself a copy of the manuscript before you send it to the person. But you'd also have an email chain that you send it to them. And as copyright laws work, you don't actually have to have it copyrighted for you to have protection rights for it. As soon as you have started writing it, you are protected under those laws. So I wouldn't be necessarily worried that somebody is then going to steal that idea. Again, feel out the situation. If they seem like they are somebody who seems a little untrustworthy or may not get back to you on stories or that kind of stuff, then you're not obligated to send, your work out to anybody. But I would not make that a forefront concern of yours to prevent yourself from using a beta reader. And definitely a concern can be poor feedback. So that's where I usually will do a swap of a portion of the work before agreeing to the whole manuscript. And that honestly will just help you also, so that you're getting good feedback and that you are also not spending a lot of your precious time and resources, on a story that is not going to work for you. Okay. So our 4 to 6 weeks are done. We've gotten the email back. They might have written a couple notes in there and said, oh, this was great. I made a few notes throughout the story. All right. So now what? So first, I would say take a deep breath. It can be very stressful getting this feedback. Again, I suggest reading through all of it first. So some of it might make you a little upset. You might read something and go, oh gosh, this person has absolutely no idea what they were talking about. Like, this is not what I meant, all that. So you'll probably have a lot of emotions and probably ones that you weren't expecting to have, as this process kind of goes on. So usually what I do is I read through all the feedback. I'm not necessarily reading through my whole story again. So again, since I like to use word and track changes, I'll read through all those track changes notes and do that first. I do, as much as possible, try to focus on, when they say, yes, oh, this is good. Okay. And not get so bogged down in the changes that need to be made at that point. That kind of helps me keep that mental balance of not feeling too overwhelmed. Then I will usually put it away for a day. So I'll read through all those notes and then not address anything right away. Kind of let them mill through my brain a little bit, especially, if the person makes some suggestions or things like that, I'll mull it over a little. And so then the next time that I open up that email, I will save it to my computer. So I usually save all of my drafts as separate documents. So I'll have, the story number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, the story beta draft, the story post beta draft with this person's initials notes. And I'll work on those documents. So that way I have every iteration of the story in case, let's say I do big changes or anything like that. And I kind of want to go back and either see how far I've come or salvage something from another version. It's all still there in some way. Then I'll go through, and the ones that kind of ask a little bit bigger questions, I'll usually make a comment note. So on track changes, when somebody makes a comment, you can reply to those comments. They don't see it. It just stays on your document itself, but I'll leave notes for myself on there. So someone might say, I'm not really sure what this person's motivation is in this. And I'll add a note that says, oh, make sure the risk of failure, is throughout this whole story, and that's their main motivator, and to, call everything back to that risk of failure. And so every time a person makes a note that is similar to that, I'll then make that subnote to myself that says, risk of failure, something like that to jog my memory. Once I've gotten through all that, so now I've read through the notes twice. Now I'll go back and start addressing it. So again, I'm saving each of these as separate drafts. So all of those notes are still in there so I can come back to. So now I'll start addressing. So the first thing I do, and kind of fiddle around with it a bit, see how the process works better for you. I find the best way that works for me is to address my easy yeses and my easy nos first. And those are usually, in my track changes. Again, I've missed a period, I have an extra space, I didn't capitalize something, they're pretty easy things that I just say, accept, 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 accept. And then also the same as like easy nos, where sometimes you'll have people that write, very interesting suggestions. And they may say, oh, it'd be really cool if space aliens came down right now. I'll be like, nah, easy no, where you can kind of get through and reject some of the stuff, that they might be suggesting for it. And it also can be, if you have those 2 beta readers where they might be the outlier, that they suggested something, no one else that has read the story has suggested this, you're not gonna take that, advice, which is totally fine. And then I go through my hard nos. So those are ones where I have to sit there for a few minutes and decide, like, okay, this is something interesting that the person has suggested. What would it look like to implement it? What would change other things in the story to implement it? And is the payoff high enough that it's worth it for me to do that? And then my last thing that I go back through is what I call my hard yeses. So those are the things that you sit and go, oh, damn, they're totally right. I absolutely have to do this, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of brain power. Like this is going to take the chunk of my editing time and my abilities and all that to figure it out. So I do that absolutely last. And that usually is from my like post beta edits. That's where I spend the most of my time. Again, when I was saying that example about switching my main character from male to female, it was a decision that I knew was the right decision. I sat on it for a while. I almost made it a hard no. But then the more I was fleshing out, I realized that it really was going to make the story better, open up a lot more opportunities for the story itself, be very interesting. But I knew it was going to be a massive undertaking. So while I did say yes to it, that did take a long time. So that was a hard yes that took a lot of work, to do. So some just additional, tips and notes. So again, I would not use too many readers, especially for those initial rounds. Every now and then I'll see on the Facebook critique partner groups that I'm in where somebody will be looking for 5 to 10 beta readers. To me, I personally think that that's really a lot. If you are a little further on in your process and you're really trying to get a lot of feedback because you've kind of gotten mixed feedback about things, maybe getting a few more readers to kind of poll for it would be a good idea. But in that beginning amount of time, I find that I get too overwhelmed working on more than 2 documents that I'm then trying to merge those changes for. So usually what I'll do is if I get feedback on the same day, ideally from my 2 beta readers, I'll go through, and whoever has made the most notes and the most actionable ones, that's usually the document that I'll run off of. And then I'll toggle back and forth, because usually a lot of the grammatical stuff and all that, they've caught the same things, so that's pretty easy. So I'll go through more of those suggestion notes on the reader who hasn't made quite as many comments. And if there's a few that are interesting that the other person didn't make, I'll go to that document and kind of make those notes really quick. But I'll typically only work off of one of those beta readers' feedback documents and then incorporate the other one. You can merge documents. Word does allow you to do that, where you can merge them and it'll tell you all of the differences between them. I tried that on a project, and for me, it was a little bit too overwhelming. But again, kind of play around on the different features that these word processors have. But again, so I find that 2 to 3 is kind of the sweet spot of you're getting more than one opinion at least, but then not an overwhelming amount. And certainly don't feel obligated to take all the feedback. Like I said, sometimes there are easy no's where I'll read something and go, that is entirely too much work to do. Especially if it's something that's not as impactful, where the person might say, oh, you made this person a brunette, but I really pictured them as a redhead. Like, that's going to take way too much work for something that's not really going to impact the story at all. So to me, that would be an easy no. And also, it's not like, I've beta read for a few books. I beta read for books that have then subsequently gotten published. I have never then gone through their published book and the beta reader feedback that I've given them to make sure that they did everything that I said. Nobody's really doing that. They're trying to be helpful. They're trying to give feedback. And a lot of it is kind of that broader, bigger picture stuff. Don't be afraid to follow up, to, ask questions if you're not sure what somebody meant. Sometimes their confusion on something can give you a level of confusion, where I have had times where, somebody might make a note of something like, oh, it would be really great to know what this person looked like, where on the page right before it, I described them. They just might have missed it, so that's something that I tend to not put a ton of stock in. But if it's something where you might say, oh, I described them on the first page and now we're on page 90, it might be worth it to reach out to that person and say, hey, so I did describe who they were, but clearly it didn't stick well enough. Do you have any suggestions to kind of do that organically to not make it constantly seem like I'm explaining what they look like, at every turn? And again, realize that everyone is on their own writing journey. They're at their own abilities, and that sometimes feedback might not be as helpful to where you currently are. So don't, again, feel obligated, feel bad, if you decide that certain feedback just really isn't actionable for you. And this one is a really big one, and it seems obvious, but it tends to not be. Make sure you say thank you. So usually when I receive an email that says, here are all your notes, all that kind of stuff, I'll do that quick read through, see if I have any big questions that jump out at me. And then I will, within probably half an hour, of doing that, I'll send them an email that says, thank you so much. I quickly went through all the notes that you made, and it really sounds like this is going to be super helpful to me. I appreciate all the time that you gave. If I come up with any questions later, I'll certainly let you know. But it was fantastic working with you. Even if it's something where their feedback isn't that actionable to you, and all that, this person did still spend a lot of time, looking at your story, and all of that for you. So I think it definitely is still worth acknowledging that. Even if the line by line stuff isn't as truly valuable, to you. And then that way, you've built that bridge now. So depending on if that feedback was really great, they might be willing to then work with you again in the future. I do really enjoy building that beta reader relationship and trying to use the same readers for multiple projects. It gives you somebody to cheer, on, and somebody, automatically in your corner. But then again, they can kind of see what some of the trends are in your writing. You can even see their improvements, and all that kind of stuff. It's a really interesting journey to be on with somebody. So some tips for you to be a good beta reader. Again, doing a swap. So accountability is really, really helpful. There are times where I will do an IOU for it. So let's say that I've reached out to my beta reader. They said that they can totally look at my project, but they're not done with theirs yet. I'll say, perfect. As soon as you are, let me know, and I will make room in my schedule to look at yours. And you have to be accountable for that. Again, people are spending a lot of time and effort, into looking at these stories. So being very truthful about that, being a good communicator. Life sometimes gets in the way. There was a time that I was doing a beta read for somebody. I was on track to finish in the 4 to 6 weeks. My family got COVID. My son, luckily was okay, but I was out of commission for about a week. And then my husband had gotten sick too. So everything fell by the wayside for a week. I immediately emailed the person when that had happened and said, I'm really sorry. I've made it to this page. I can either send that to you now if you really need this feedback this second, and then I can send you the other half, in a week, or I can send you the whole thing in a week if you can wait. And that kind of lets them know, because sometimes people are on deadlines, whether it's not for submitting for a contest or trying to get in before an agent closes to queries, for a few months or things like that. So really letting them know that you are still in the process, but that it is going to take a little bit longer. And also just being as truthful, as transparent as possible. I am very forthright in the type of beta reader I am for other people. I had done a beta read pretty early on in my writing journey with somebody, and I am someone who likes lots and lots of feedback. I want to know what's working. I want to know things I can improve on, and all of that. So I like to be that type of beta reader. So if you were to send me a story to beta read, you're going to get it back with lots and lots of track changes. And that can be really overwhelming, but it doesn't always mean, it's bad. I will say, oh my gosh, I love this line, or yes, 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 yes. Or, oh, I can't believe she did that. So I kind of do a running commentary at the same time. But this person who I had done a read for, they were not looking for any constructive criticism. And so when I had sent it to them, they were very, very upset about the beta reading notes that I had given them, and I also felt terrible because here I was putting forth a lot of my time and effort, trying to give things for this person to improve for their craft when that really wasn't what they were looking for. They honestly pretty much wanted somebody to read it and just say that they liked it, which is fine. You just have to be really honest with yourself and with other people, what you're looking for and what you provide. So again, that's where I think doing those first couple of chapters is really helpful. Because I am very transparent that I say I use lots and lots of notes. I am not necessarily going to sugarcoat stuff, but I'm not here to hurt your feelings, or talk you out of any idea or anything like that. I look at it for every story that I write. I want to be better than the last one that I wrote. And then again, conforming your formats and expectations. So again, I'm at the point now where I'm probably not going to do an exchange with somebody who does Google Docs. I have Scrivener, but it's not a program that I have found very user-friendly. So that's also probably an avenue that I wouldn't do. So I'm also very forthright with that of, here's what I'm looking for. I work in Word with track changes. I'm looking for somebody, who kind of does the same thing. All right, so I'm going to stop the share so that I can see all your comments. So thank you all. Hopefully that kind of gave everybody a little bit of an overview, of each of those pieces. All right, let me go through your chats. Have you ever used Scrivener? Okay, so for those of you who have not done National Novel Writing Month, Scrivener is one of the sponsors for it. So if you successfully complete the month, you get, maybe a 30-day or 90-day or something trial of Scrivener to use. So I done it one time. And the learning curve for it was just a little too high than what I had wanted to invest at that point. I've heard from people that have done it that you really need to set aside like a day, do all the tutorials, all of the lessons, all that stuff, to like really know how to do it well. Since Word works for me, it kind of makes me feel a little crotchety. I'm like, I already know how to use something. I'm not learning something new. Like I said, since I have found something that already works for me, and I already have such a limited time, since, I work a full-time job, I'm married, I have a young kid, I have 2 dogs, I have interest, I am usually lucky if I can get 45 minutes of writing time in a day. Sometimes it's only 20 minutes. And so I'm using that to write, not to necessarily learn more software. So I know that there are ways that you can do it. And I know that there are ways that you can export into Word. I don't know how to do that. So that might be a good future speaker for you all to get. I know there are people who do entire presentations on Scrivener, but I have heard that if you are using their program, that their own tutorials are fantastic. So I have heard to definitely do those. So hopefully that's helpful. So as far as personal relationships, for critique partners, alpha readers, and beta readers, that one's a little hard. I mean, I know colloquially, there's kind of these adages of never have like your mom be your beta reader because she's just going to say supportive things and not be helpful. My sister is somebody who I will use sometimes as an early reader. She does not feel like our family connection means that she has to be extra nice to me when she's reading stuff. So she will straight up just tell me like, this is not working. What are you talking about? So there's a level of familiarity that I think can be helpful for that for someone, but I will say, as somebody who has struggled in the past to find readers for my stories, sometimes you have to take a beggars can't be choosers attitude also sometimes. So there have been times where I have, agreed to do a swap with somebody and it hasn't really worked out very well, because I didn't know them. I didn't really know their processes and I learned my lesson. I just won't use them again. But once you do kind of find, that critique partner or that, person that really works for you, I would say at that point, certainly try to cultivate it as much as possible. Again, if you're on any social medias, if that person post something about their writing process, share it, congratulate them, kind of develop that relationship, so that you can really, have that level of trust with each other that that they are going to be truthful. And for some people, that is something you'll have to cultivate. And for some people, that's just naturally how they come into the beta reading process. So unfortunately, there's going to be kind of some trial and error for that. But once you do find those good beta readers, do whatever you can to keep them happy and keep them wanting to read your work. Oh, and thank you for those messaging me and saying thanks. Thank you all for coming again. Okay, so curious, do I outline before I start? So I do. And actually, I have a whole presentation also on outlining and plotting your novel too. So maybe one day I will be blessed to be able to come back and talk to you all. I am what I would call an intense plotter. So there's kind of like, so you have your pantsers, so you're people that right by the seat of your pants, you sit down at your computer and you just start typing. You have your plotters who plan everything out, sometimes to a very specific degree, sometimes to a more general degree. And then you have your plantsers who kind of have a bit of an idea of what they're going to do, but might not have a set thing that they're writing every time. So I am doing Nano this year. I find that it is, for me, I am successful in writing a book when I know absolutely everything that's going to happen. Some people don't work that way. I don't understand it. I don't know how they can sit down and not know how their whole story is going and get to an end. It is wildly impressive to me. But I will go through and plot out my whole thing. One of my favorite resources, and I will type it on here, is Fiction University, Janice Hardy. So it's a website called Fiction University. She also has a couple of workbooks and stuff on Amazon. She is wonderful, tons and tons and tons of free resources. I use her Plot Your Novel workbook. And it just asks a lot of good questions, about your scenes, about your characters, those kinds of things. I work a little backwards. So when I get a new story idea, I write my blurb first, and then I write my synopsis, and then I write a chapter by chapter outline. I have a bit of a reputation in my writers groups of being like a total hardcore nutso with them. So this is my one for my story this year. So every single page is a chapter. And so I handwrite out the entire thing. Yeah, so usually when I say that and start giving, that other presentation, people's eyes get wide. I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to be that hardcore, to plot out your books. But again, I'm on my 8th right now, and I figured out that this is a process that works for me. And I would say overwhelmingly in writing and all of that, that is really the core of everything. Try a couple of things out, and when you find something that works for you, don't be apologetic about it and run with it. So for me, it works for me to have a brand new notebook for every single project. I carry this thing around with me. It has my character lists on it. It's my true story Bible. I always write at the beginning of them, reward if found, with my phone number, just in case I ever lose it somewhere. But I work better typing on my computer, but not having to toggle back and forth, which kind of Scrivener does a bit, where I like having the physical, active writing when I'm doing that plotting process. Okay. Oh, that is such a great question. So how do we stop the internal negative voices shooting down ideas before you ever reach your critique group or alpha readers? Oh, that's such a good question. So I usually I have both a notebook and then just like the notes app on my phone. I have a list of just story ideas. So when one pops in my head, I usually jot a note down. Doesn't hurt anything just to have it in there. And then, like I said, I usually plan my writing year around participating in National Novel Writing Month. It's easier for me to say, okay, during this month, all of my free time, I'm going to actively put toward drafting a book. And then I can work on editing and all that stuff the rest of the year. So it just works a little bit better for my home schedule, and all of that. So usually around September, I start trying to dig through my story ideas to find out like which one is the one. And so I have found, again, through, the process that I do with the plotting, that gives me my level of confidence. I've had too many times where there's this adage of, do you have a story or do you have an idea? Where it's a really great idea, but it can't sustain 80,000 words. Now that doesn't mean that it can't be a short story, it can't be flash fiction, it can't be a novella, all of those things have their places, but I am actively looking for an idea that is a novel, whether it's for young adults, anything like that. And since I do have such a limited amount of time, I need to be really cutthroat and ruthless about it. So if I can't get 50 chapters plotted for a story, I know I'm not going to have enough for a whole book. And so it doesn't make the cut. So that might be something I keep in my back pocket for a short story anthology, or something like that. So it really has helped me on that confidence level. And that's where I think your critique, group or partnership, or even just your other author friends that you chat with, can be really helpful in just talking about those small little nuggets of an idea, even if you don't have the whole thing fleshed out. So I think that internal negativity, like it's just a hard thing to battle with. My favorite piece of writing advice, which helps me get through some of that stuff, is you can't edit a blank page. And so I try to make that my mantra of, even when I have scenes that are not working, I put something down because I know I can fix it later. I'm a really big fan of using brackets in my early drafts. And so I'll have times literally where I'll be halfway through a chapter and put in brackets, "This is awful," in all capital letters, "come back and fix it." And I just move on to the next chapter. That's another benefit of having my whole book plotted out. I don't have to write chapter 10 to be able to write chapter 50. I already know what's happening in all of those. So if I have a point where my story's kind of waning a little bit, I just might jump to the next chapter, because chances are something's getting edited in there anyway. So I think for me, for that kind of like negative voice, I counter it with, yeah, of course my first draft is going to be a dumpster fire. Like, that's literally its point. So I try to approach it that way, of saying like, yeah, this is going to be really bad, and I'm just going to have to fix it later, and make a level of peace with that. And so that helps me not get too bogged down in, oh, this line isn't working, or I don't know if this character works or this scene works. Like I've already made peace that I'm going to be spending the next 6 months fixing this thing anyway. So I might as well, get it down. Have I participated in the 3-day novel contest? No, I haven't. I am going to click on that link when we get off of here, though, since I know we're kind of getting close to the end of our time to look into that. That sounds really interesting. What's your opinion of editing programs such as Grammarly? So Grammarly, I have not used. I have done, the new version of Word has an editor program in there that's actually pretty decent. Grammar is not my strongest point, but I'm very lucky to have one of my reliable beta readers. She's really good at that stuff. So apologies to her that I sort of passed the buck on that one a little bit, where I get things as good, as I can get it. But again, I know it's going to have to get fixed at some point. So I have heard people having, good luck with that. My books, I also have been lucky enough that they are all traditionally published. If I were self-publishing, especially a full-length novel, I would look at some of those more editing software type things. Again, just so that I wouldn't necessarily be paying an editor for line-by-line grammar as much as possible. I could save that money for doing the more developmental editing, and try to get as much of that done, as I could on my own. But I think it's true anywhere in the, in the writing process. Like, if you're wanting to publish in some manner, or have your stories out there for other people to read, it's going to cost money. So you just need to figure out where you think either your own knowledge deficiencies are, where your strengths are, things that you can do yourself. Are you a great artist? Do your own covers, save your money for that and put all of your money into editing. Are you not really great with computer type stuff? Okay, outsource the formatting, but you can do some of the other stuff, so for all of that, and then even for, traditional publishing, I'm not putting forth the money for, the editors, but I pay for it in how much money I get for every book that sells. So it's all kinds of pluses and minuses for all of that. But I do know, especially some of my friends that do the self-publishing, that they have, used and had success with Grammarly. But I personally don't have a lot of experience with it. So I definitely also, because I like, learning new tips and tricks and stuff from different writers groups that I talk to. So has anybody on here have any other kind of like success stories that they've had with beta readers or tips that they have found, helpful? Certainly feel free to unmute your microphone and hop on, or if there's any other questions, that I didn't touch on, of all that, I certainly, I like to learn even as I'm giving a presentation on something, if there's more I can learn about a topic. Certainly.
Ann?
It's Ann. Can I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Ann.
I can't see everybody, so I'm not sure that Bill was even recognizing me. I have to say that I do oral presentations. And so oftentimes I will have somebody read, the text and the poems and the stories just to see if it flows, if something should be taken out. And so in that respect, I think you can use, if I had never called it a beta reader, but people that I trust to give me that kind of feedback. They don't change anything. They just say, this doesn't work here, it should go here, or I think people will be really moved by this. And so there's, and I often put it in a PowerPoint presentation with some kind of graphics with it. And so, so that's really worked for me. And so I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, Anne, you touched on something awesome that I'm going to put in my presentation now from now on about tips of being a good beta reader. So I love how you said that they don't necessarily change anything. So this is something too that, you kind of have to remind yourself as you're doing that beta reading process is not trying to make someone else's words sound like yours. And that's awesome that you talked about that, Anne. I appreciate it. I'm going to steal that. So when you're going through, and it's hard because there are times where, you might read something and go, oh gosh, I can just make this so much better if I just rewrite this whole paragraph for somebody. And so in those instances, I usually will, sometimes I might do a little bit or like restructure something to just be like, see what I mean here, like how this makes this flow a little bit better. But yes, really fighting that urge to make someone else's story yours. You are trying to make their story more theirs and better and make them a better writer because of the feedback that you're giving. So that's awesome. That's fantastic that you have people and that will do that for you also, especially for the presentations. As that sometimes is, you create this whole thing and then stand in front of a room and hope that it goes well. So that's wonderful. Yeah, John, I see your hand up.
Yeah. All right, real quick. When you were talking about Grammarly, I don't know if anybody has used the editing app that I like using. It's called Pro Writer. Has anybody seen this one?
I have heard of that.
Yeah, I have to say that I looked at Grammarly and I looked at that one, and what I liked about Pro Writer is it gives you trends, but it will also give you overused words. It will give you it'll also compare you to authors in your genre. So successfully written authors, what it will do, or published authors, if you're writing a thriller, it'll compare you to some of the major writers, and not just not from story, but like sentence length, use of just different things about it. I like using it because I'll run my chapter through it. It'll clean, it'll offer suggestions. And then I go in, I like using the overused word. And what it'll do is when you click on it, it'll tell you this word's been used this many times, cut it back by 2. And then when you go in, it actually helps you rewrite and restructure your sentences too. I'm still in the infancy of writing. So, I've been working at this for a while. So instead of going to college and learning how to do it, I just decided to join the long writers group and have them bloody my paper on a monthly basis. No, I'm just kidding. I love these guys. But if anybody was interested, I think Pro Writer offers like a 2-week free trial, and you can actually use it for 2 weeks. And then if you decide to keep it, then you just pay for it. So I just thought I'd toss that out there. But I like that one because there's so many other options from a writing aspect.
That's a good one. I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah, because what I like about it too is you can choose what you're writing. If you're writing nonfiction, fiction, historical fiction, fantasy, it gives you the genres too. So it pays attention to how they write the algorithms for that. I don't know. So I just wanted to offer that to the group.
Yeah, that might be interesting too for if you're struggling with comps. So comparison works for doing for submitting to agents. That might be an interesting tool to run through, especially if it suggests writers of a similar genre type. You can look through their catalog and see if there's any books that you can compare yours to.
Yeah, they'll show you sentence length. They'll tell you the sentence length. They'll even tell you it'll even show the reading level of of your readers, and so forth. So I like it. I really, and it's really user friendly. There's no big curve to using it.
Yeah,
upload the document, hit go button, and it just kicks it all back.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, so does anybody else have any clarification questions or anything like that? I know we covered quite a bit of stuff today. I will also put my email in the chat. So if there is something that, comes up later that you think of, oh gosh, what was it that she said about this or whatever, feel free to, shoot me an email, and hopefully I'll be able to clarify it for you.
Any other comments or questions for Kristin? All right. Well, thank you, Kristin. That was very interesting. Really enjoyed it. You mentioned that you have a program on outlining your novel, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And you mentioned to me before that you have one on the use of firearms in fiction.
Yes. So my day job, so I'm not, maybe one day, but I am not currently a full-time writer. So I am a crime gun intelligence analyst and a forensic firearms examiner for the state of Florida. Yes. So I do presentations on correct terminology, both of the crime lab and also firearms themselves. I had started it, one of the writers groups that I was in, I had a woman approach me who she wrote thriller mysteries. And she admitted she just stabbed everybody in her books because she didn't know how guns worked. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said, I'll give a presentation. I was like, you're fine if you want to stab everybody. I'm like, but no, I'll teach you how to. So that's kind of how that progressed. So yeah, so if any of you, I have done some of the thriller writer groups in Florida have given that presentation to also. So if you all do have a subset, of thriller mystery, even some historical, that kind of stuff of any of your groups. Yeah, I absolutely. That one, it's a lot of information, but it's a pretty fun talk.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
I wondered how you had come across such a specific topic, and it's now
yes,
that's great.
Yes. So when we touch on, court stuff too, because I do also, because I am an expert witness, so I do testify, in court, for all that. So again, my email is in the chat here. So also feel free to, shoot me an email if you are planning to stab another character in your story and you want to know how a revolver works or something, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll try to workshop through a scene with you for it. But yeah, you all are a lovely group. I would be more than happy to come back and speak to you all again sometime.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions from anybody? Last chance. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. You have a great rest of your weekend. For those who are drafting this month, good luck.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, before we close it up,
Take care all. Thank you.
thank you, Kristin. Before we end it, I just wanted to mention that December 3rd, we have the Poetry Pod, Poet's Choice, coming up. That was a real eye-opener for me last year, so I'm looking forward to it again this year. And then we're kicking off January is David Bachner, which would be of he's a friend of or a colleague of Harry's there, and has some poetry that he'd like to share with some new books. And then memoir writing with Denise will be in February. So looking forward to all that as well. So good times ahead. Gloria, I can hand it back over to you and can bring it all to an end here, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was wonderful, and I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. And with that, I'd like to say goodbye, everyone, and I'll see you at the next meeting. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.